It's not very often, if ever, a battle royale attempts to highlight melee combat, or in the special case of Rumbleverse, a mixture of melee brawling and good old-fashioned wrestling. Rumbleverse, developed by Iron Galaxy and published by Epic Games, would launch August 11th, 2022, and as the unique aspects might imply, would sort of take the world by a mini-storm, drawing even some of the biggest gaming influencers. But unlike many other BRs, Rumbleverse would have a very short time in the sun, being sunsetted under a year later. Although Rumbleverse had a cult following, it seemed to struggle to catch more mainstream appeal that it needed to succeed. What went wrong with the Brawler Grappler BR, and why was Rumbleverse killed so quickly? On this episode of Death of a Game, we cover yet another BR, a battle royale, but a fairly unique one at that, and an idea, at the very least, that I saw potential in. Pay attention to the clues along the way, detectives, as the timeline unfolds and evidence is collected, all culminating in everyone's favorite final deduction. You know, kind of what we detectives are known for. Get ready to pile driver someone off a building and be the last fighters standing, detectives. Iron Galaxy was known for some fun minor fighting games like Dive Kick, and although I slighted them by accident in one of my other videos, they were also known for the rather liked arcade fighter Killer Instinct Season 2 and 3, though mainly Season 3. After failing an Attack on the Titan-like title, dubbed Extinction, those successes that I mentioned previously hadn't come in quite a long time. Rumbleverse would be announced December 9th, 2021, and I think it's safe to say that not many people were expecting much from it. According to CEO Adam Boyes, in a conversation with co-CEO Chelsea Blasco, she just yelled out, "We should do wrestling," and that was kind of how Rumbleverse was born. Rumbleverse was reportedly set to be a free-to-play brawler-focused BR, where you used your fists and grappling attacks instead of guns or magic. You would pick up magazines, which would give you special attacks, or use stat potions, which would make you more powerful. The game, like most battle royales as well, is about being the last man standing, the difference being the gameplay itself. And when you get knocked out of the ring, so to say, there's a countdown timer that counts you out, sort of like wrestling. With the ability to pile driver people off of buildings and poster people in all kinds of funny ways, Rumbleverse was looking quite fun, gameplay-wise. Although the game was originally set to launch February 15th, 2022, it would end up being delayed to later in the year, in the fall. IG would basically say that they needed more time to make the game great, which was understandable. Rumbleverse would hold a cross-platform test following their delay in the summer of 2022. I personally think that the game's best bet was on consoles, with the very small 40-person max lobby count. Allowing for cross-platform would also greatly help supplement those population numbers, but even then, if the game wasn't popular enough, it could still potentially not be enough. That's a fear of such a game. Needing 40 players versus 4 or 5 for cooperative kinds of things, you get my point. There were some serious concerns looking back at Rumbleverse, how the game was even going to monetize as well, and that stems as far back as pre-launch even. One of the most controversial things about the game thus far, though, was its presentation, and in the age of Fortnite gamers, this was going to be a serious knock. Speaking of Fortnite, its influence on Rumbleverse seems kind of random, but would be impossible not to see or feel when the developers helped port Fortnite to consoles. For example, the visual style, while featuring different models, features very similar colors and aesthetics. Even the cover of the game itself kind of looks more like a Fortnite spin-off game than anything unique. Being compared to a game that basically leads the industry and how impressive the engine is, Unreal and all that, was not going to work very well for Rumbleverse though. Still, there's always a chance that they could hit it big as a smaller studio, which would allow them to pump more into the game or make a new, more ambitious one altogether. Part of what also makes Rumbleverse unique is that it was set to only launch on PC through the Epic Games platform. Part of this was because they took a developmental deal like many others did for funding, but the surprising thing, I guess, is that they didn't use Epic Games as a launch test, then actually launch on Steam like most game devs who took the same deal. Whether this was because of less belief in the product or belief it was better suited on Epic Games as a novelty sort of game is a mystery. They do deserve some nice words though for not taking the easier money approach, I would say so at least. Rumbleverse would launch on all platforms August 11th, 2022, and take the streaming world by a bit of a storm. Rumbleverse wasn't just a unique game that attracted eyes alone, it was a unique game that seemed to push even more unique gameplay when compared to its competitors. Something that does well to heat up and draw fast attention from the runoff of the industry kind of thing. Because the game never launched on Steam, I can't really track its population data much, but I know that Rumbleverse at the start was at least attracting an initial player base, as it had some of the top streamers playing the game such as Lyric and Carnage. Rumbleverse was creating some fun, memorable moments for players despite being restricted as a game in some ways.
Oh! Let's go! Oh!
But don't get cocky!
IGN would give Rumbleverse a total glowing review. If it can get its technical issues under control, and progress is already being made on that front, Rumbleverse's fantastic wrestling-flavored gameplay has everything going for it to become the next big thing in the Battle Royale genre. Once I was in a match slamming bodies, slapping chests, and RKOing dudes from out of nowhere, it quickly became some of the most fun that I had had playing video games in 2022. And it's more than just a spectacle. There are some extremely deep and well thought out mechanics ingrained into its combat design, opening up plenty of possibilities to outplay and outthink your opponent, just like in a smartly designed fighting game. I'm hoping it fleshes out the shop with more worthwhile and over-the-top items, but if Rumbleverse is this good right out of the gate, I can't wait to see where it goes over the next few years. Now, there's nothing really wrong with liking the game so much, but the issue was that IGN's reviews seemed to be kind of in a vacuum, with many outlets just choosing outright to skip reviewing the game altogether, and others like WCCFTT Tech, I hate this name, but they're a good website, having a quite abysmal review of the game, where they stated that Rumbleverse occasionally delivers the type of bruising highlights that look good on live streams, but it's held back by a lack of content and unbalanced mechanics that actually discourage the brawling that's supposed to be the game's bread and butter. You may want to go a few rounds with Rumbleverse given its non-existent entry fee, but I don't expect it to go to the distance. Unfortunately, most of the crowd was having more of the latter reaction, and not the former. Not the glazing reaction. And if they were experiencing the aspects of the former, they were just fleeting, not enough to sustain an audience long term. And not even midterm, seemingly. In a mere 5 months, Rumbleverse would be announced to be shut down in the coming month, which felt like, for fans in and out of the loop of the game, still quite shocking. Usually BRs last a few years, and some of those years are kind of shells of themselves, you have to admit. But Rumbleverse wasn't even able to last a year, which seemed quite shocking. My detective intuition tells me it could be them cutting their losses and not thinking that they could overcome their issues they were encountering in the game. Or perhaps Epic Games wasn't impressed enough with their performance. It is a business after all. I wouldn't be surprised if IG comes out with something bigger and better after Rumbleverse, however. The servers for Rumbleverse, the unlikely Wrastlin' BR, would shut down February 28th, 2023, and in just a jiffy, the game was gone. And people felt like things were just too soon. And I mentioned that one of the reasons being, potentially, maybe they just felt like the game's issues were insurmountable. And there's not always something wrong about just packing up your ball and going home. That's because the part that was missing from Rumbleverse was the unique personality that's known and unique in wrestling games and all of that sort of stuff. It was lacking the good presentation that you expect from stuff like that. Think about it. The game looks like a crappy version of Fortnite and doesn't leverage really any of the wrestling aspects nearly enough. Presentation is more than just visuals though. It's the art style as well, the animation and the packaging of all of it together. And the animations for a brawler type game are quite amateurish, sorry to say. Fighting game fans are just used to a high standard there. Same thing with the models and the art styles and the whole costumes. If you can't sell that to players, then you can't monetize your game. When players can't feel or look epic because their character looks like a Pillsbury Doughboy, well, it really removes a lot of the epicness of the game, and frankly goes against what's so epic and cool about wrestling and the aesthetic of pro wrestling, which is all about performance and taunts and storylines and more. Pro wrestling is super popular even in the modern day today. Had they gone more into attracting those kinds of players and that kind of audience, I think that IG would have had far more success. Whether that be leaning more into the WWE aspects, luchador aspects, something, right? But the problem being, in a sense, that when you compare Rumbleverse to the WWE gaming series, it pales in comparison to its gameplay options and sheer content that's offered in these games. I mean, it's kind of like absurd. The WWE games and franchises like one of the silliest games that you can play. Rumbleverse, by comparison, feels more serious and has more of a focus on being a competitive battle royale, and yet also at the same time kind of just looks less serious. It has a conflicting message. So maybe they didn't need to lean into it after the fact because despite being inspired by wrestling, they didn't really make a game for wrestling, and the grappling is fairly minimum, all things considered, especially compared to games like the WWE gaming series. There's just such missed opportunities there with unique finishers and special KO states not even being included in my opinion, which makes fixing the game in some ways seem like nearly an impossible affair. While I do think that there is a lot of potential in the gaming world for more wrestling games, including platformers and other styles of the game, I think venturing too far outside of what people are familiar with and expect with a wrestling game is just not gonna work in such an established industry that is wrestling that has been around for quite a while. WWE games too are just doing really well at the moment, and they just came out with another one. And then party games like Gang Beasts exist, and more like it, that have tons of grappling and wrestling moments in them. So in a sense, the demand not being there for Rumbleverse could have been due to the player base just being quite used to good games in the industry at the time, and just not being used to something like Rumbleverse, which just didn't offer enough of the wrestling or the gameplay aspects that WWE and wrestling fans would expect. With that music playing, early in this case or not, that means that we have a final deduction to conduct. We have reached the end of the timeline and obtained enough clues. So why did Rumbleverse die? It lacked the presentation package that was needed to really wow its audience. It was too Fortnite adjacent in some weird ways. It failed to generate revenue. The developer was largely successful as a porter of games and not an original IP developer. It lacks content and longevity in its design. While in some ways it might seem like I was dismissive of Rumbleverse, I would have liked to see more wrestling or even just grappling games in general, especially in the multiplayer context. I think that there is still a lot to tap into there, but the game itself, no matter how much potential I see in it or the idea itself, did feel quite half-baked, and never quite got the proper time in the oven, or out of it, to complete the cooking analogy. Stories like this about lesser-known titles can be lost to time quite easily, especially because this game only lasted for under 6 months. But I saw something interesting enough in Rumbleverse that I wanted to add it to our case studies and tell its story ultimately. Thanks for watching.
So, figure out who we're killing yet? Oh.